Welcome everyone to officially to Mishnah Zevachim. This class is part of the Rifka Rosenwein Memorial Division and is sponsored in her memory by her family. We're starting today both a new, chunk of Mishnah and a new Sefer. Very exciting. I'm looking forward. And it's also a pleasure to have Rabbi Avie Walfish here. Rabbi is, until recently, a teacher of Talmud and Jewish thought at Herzog College. He headed the Masters of Education program in Mechila. He is a student. He was a student at Yeshiva University as well as in Hebrew University and a musmach of Rav Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg. He has written and taught extensively on Mishnah, including Mishnah Tapestries. He has been a returning teacher to the Mishnah Depth series, and it's just such a pleasure to have him back. And with that, I'm going to head over to Rabbi Walfish.
Okay, thank you very much, Kayla. Good to be back and good to start a new Seder, Seder Kodshim, not one of the better known or more popular Sedarim, same way that the book of Vayikra is not the most popular of the books of the Torah, but we'll try to introduce a bit of order and try to gain some insight into what some of the themes and ideas are in this topic. Okay, what we're talking about is the topic of sacrifices. Sacrifices is, of course, one of the topics that the Torah discusses rather extensively and in fairly great detail. Unlike other areas, Mishnah Masechet Chagiga notes that things like the laws of Shabbat, they are like hararim hatluyim bisara. It's like a mountain suspended by a hair, because there is so little detail in the Torah as to what are the laws of Shabbat, and in the Torah Shebaal Peh, in the Mishnah, we have extensive discussion, 24 chapters of Masechet Shabbat, and you can add the 10 chapters of Masechet Eruvin. It's quite extensively discussed. Kodshim, on the other hand, is quite extensively discussed in the Torah. And before diving into the Mishnah, I think it makes sense for us to have a look at what we in fact have in the Torah. So let's decided for the biblical background not to bother with the actual Hebrew text, and we'll just make do with the English text because we're just looking for some general ideas. We're not going to go too deeply into any of them in particular. Okay, so the exact language of the text is less crucial. It's always crucial, but not as crucial. In Vayikra, we have two sections that give us a kind of rundown of the different kinds of sacrifices that a person might bring, and we should pay some attention both to the what is described regarding each korban and the order in which the different korbanot are presented in the two sections. The first section, chapters 1 through 4, if your offering is a burnt offering from the herd, that's what we call in Hebrew an olah offering. Burnt offering, for reasons we will shortly see. You shall make your offering a male without blemish. You shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting for acceptance in your behalf before Hashem. The bull, that's the first type of korban olah the Torah describes. There are another couple of animals that are described later, which we're skipping. The bull shall be slaughtered before Hashem, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall offer the blood, dashing the blood against all sides of the altar, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The burnt offering shall be flayed and cut up into sections. Its entrails and legs shall be washed with water, and, this is the key, the priest shall turn the whole into smoke on the altar as a burnt offering, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to Hashem. So that's the nature of the Olah offering. Olah, it all goes up, it all ascends to heaven in the form of smoke being burnt entire on the altar after the animal has been divided up into pieces. Each piece is thrown onto the altar and they're all burnt there. Okay, I'm skipping chapter 2, which is not discussed in Zevachim. Chapter 2 talks about minachot. That's the next tractate in Kodshim, meal offerings. And the next animal offering is in chapter 3. If your offering is a sacrifice of well-being, what we call shlamim, a shlamim offering, which they translate here as well-being. If you offer of the herd, whether a male or a female, you shall bring before Hashem one without blemish. You shall lay a hand upon the head of your offering and slaughter it at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Aaron's sons, the priest, shall dash the blood against all sides of the altar. Okay, we'll just note this is similar to what we had in the Olah offering. Because the blood part of the ceremony is similar with the Olah and the Shlamim. Then present from the sacrifice of well-being as an offering by fire to Hashem, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that is about the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them that is at the loins, and the protuberance on the liver, which you shall remove with the kidneys. All of those are offered on the altar. Aaron's son shall turn these into smoke on the altar. Okay, with the burnt offering, which is upon the wood that is on the fire, is an offering by fire of pleasing odor to Hashem. Okay, interestingly, the text explicitly connects the shlamim to the olah. The part of the shlamim that's offered on the altar is offered on the altar on which the olah has been offered. Okay, almost as though the olah is the basis. Okay, let's remember, we'll see this a bit later. There is a daily olah offering brought on the altar, and that's like the foundation. And on that foundation, you add other sacrifices, parts of which are offered on the altar, and those parts join the olah. Altogether, they go up as an offering of pleasing odor to Hashem. Just to note, pleasing odor to Hashem would presumably not be a pleasing odor to us human beings. Burning meat is not a very pleasant odor as far as we're concerned. Okay, but pleasing
Can I
odor.
ask you? Can
Yeah.
I ask you something? What would an olah be brought for, and what would a shlamim be brought for? In other words, a korban toda, I understand, but when would does an individual bring it? Does the community bring it? When would?
Okay, let's hold that question for just a bit. We'll come back to it in a few minutes. Okay, I'd like to get a little more perspective on the different kinds of sacrifices, and then we'll come back and briefly address your question, because this is this is just an introduction, and we have to get to Mishnah, but it is an important question which we will briefly be dealing with in a few minutes. Okay, chapter 4 talks about another kind of animal sacrifice. Okay, and we'll see immediately what it is. If it is the anointed priest who has incurred guilt, so that blame falls upon the people, he shall offer for the sin of which he is guilty a bull of the horde without blemish as a sin offering to Hashem. Sin offering means chatat. That's what we call it in Hebrew. Some scholars today think that chatat actually does not come from the word chet, meaning sin offering, but rather from the word chitui, which means cleansing. Okay, cleansing, and it's similar, something we read in the Parshat Shavua just a couple of weeks ago about the parat chatat, otherwise known as para aduma. Okay, and the job of the para aduma is chatat, great me chatat, which is cleansing water. Okay, and so some think that's the purpose of a korban chatat as well, or it might actually be, which I tend to believe, a wordplay. Okay, which the Torah sort of leaves it purposely ambiguous. It could mean this, it could mean that, and maybe it actually is designed to mean both at the same time. Okay, you shall bring the bull to the entrance of the tent of the meeting before Hashem, and lay a hand upon the head of the bull. The bull shall be slaughtered before Hashem, and the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood and bring it into the tent of meeting. Priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle of the blood 7 times before Hashem in front of the curtain of the shrine. Some of you may pick up on a similarity between this chatat offering and the sacrificial service of Yom Kippur. A very strong connection between the two of them. And on Yom Kippur as well, the Kohen Gadol brings a har lechatat for himself and for his family, okay, and has a somewhat more elaborate version of what was just described here, okay. And if we go a bit further on, the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of aromatic incense, Mizbach HaKtoret, okay, the golden altar, which is inside the sanctuary, which is at the tent of meeting before Hashem, and all the rest of the bull's blood he shall pour it at the base of the altar. He shall remove all the fat from the bull of a sin offering, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat is about the entrails. Sounds familiar from the Shlamim. The priest shall turn them into smoke on the altar of burnt offering, but all the rest of the bull shall carry it to a pure place outside the camp to the ash heap and burn it up in a wood fire. So this kind of chatat offering, okay, for the high priest, which is the holiest form of chatat offering, a small portion of it is offered on the altar, of course, as well as the blood, which is sprinkled inside the tent of meeting in various places, or being poured onto the base of the altar. And then the bulk, a bit of it is brought on the altar, the same parts that we had in the Shlamim, and the rest of it is burnt outside the camp. Okay, but then we have other kinds of korban chatat. I brought one as an example. If any person from among the populace unwittingly incurs guilt by doing any of the things which by Hashem's commandments ought not to be done, okay, atonement by sacrifice is only for inadvertent sins, not for potential sins, with 1 or 2 exceptions. That person shall bring a female goat without blemish as an offering for the sin of that which one is guilty. The offerer shall lay a hand upon the head of the sin offering. Sin offering shall be slaughtered. The priest shall take with his finger some of its blood and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering. Notice how this is different from the olah and the shlamim. The olah and the shlamim, the language was that it shall be dashed against the sides of the altar. Okay, and this is put on the horns of the altar. Okay, we'll see what the Mishnah does with that a bit when we get further into into the tractate. Okay, but it's definitely important to note that the blood work of the chatat, here we're talking about the standard chatat for an individual sinner, is very different from the blood work of the olah and the shlamim, which are very similar to one another. Okay, and then the offerer shall remove all its fat. Okay, just the fat is removed from the sacrifice of well-being, and the priest shall turn it into smoke on the altar for a pleasing odor. Priest shall thus make expiation for that person who shall be forgiven. Something's left out here. What happens to the rest of the animal? Okay, we have a small part of the animal that's offered on the altar. What happens to the rest? Torah doesn't address that here. Interestingly, we'll come back to it. Okay, chapters 6, 7. Okay, this is a sampling. Okay, but it gives you a kind of overview of what happens in chapters 1 through 4. Chapters 6 and 7 again review the sacrifices, but let's look at the different emphases. Command Aaron and his sons thus. This is the ritual of the burnt offering. The burnt offering shall remain where it is burnt upon the altar all night until morning, while the fire on the altar is kept going on it. The fire on the altar shall be kept burning, not to go out. Every morning the priest shall feed wood to it, lay out the burnt offering on it, and turn into smoke the fat parts of the offerings of well-being. A perpetual fire shall be kept burning on the altar, not to go out. Okay, now it's interesting. It opens with, this is the ritual of the burnt offering. But if you didn't have that opening, you would almost think that this is not so much a description of the burnt offering, but a description of the perpetual fire, the Eish Tamid. And in fact, the impression we get from this passage is that's what the Korban Olah is all about. The Korban Olah is about feeding the perpetual fire. Now, I mentioned earlier, there is a daily Tamid offering, one in the morning, one towards evening. Okay, Shnaim layom olah Tamid et hakebetz echad taseh v'boker. Probably some of you know this by heart because we read it every Rosh Chodesh, and we just read it yesterday.
We just read it yesterday at Pinchas.
Right? So that's the Korban Tamid, twice daily. Okay, and now we see what the purpose of the Korban Tamid is. It's to feed the fire. It's not enough for the fire to consume wood. You have to have wood. You shall feed wood. That's the basis of the fire, okay? We all know that, okay? You make a campfire, it's got to be wood. And if you make a barbecue, okay, so you start off with the wood and then you add whatever all else, right? So you start off with the wood and then you burn the burnt offerings on it. The Olah offerings, okay, are the real source of the fire. Okay, you want the source of the fire to be something above and beyond wood. You want it to be what Am Yisrael has brought to God as sacrifices. Those sacrifices feed the fire. Okay, when would an individual feel the need to bring his own Olah? He probably wants to do the same thing. He wants to say, I also want to feed the perpetual fire. The perpetual fire, we can think about what it represents, okay? An ongoing presence of God among the in the midst of the nation, right? The fire represents a kind of divine revelation. You had it at Sinai. We have it on the 8th day of dedication of the sanctuary. We have it later on with Eliyahu, when the temple is dedicated. In many places, fire coming down represents a divine revelation. And on the other hand, you can see the fire as being how we ascend, or we symbolically try to bring ourselves up to God. We offer him something as a way of perhaps symbolically offering ourselves, okay, or seeing ourselves somehow as ascending together with the burnt offerings to God. So an individual who wants that, okay, will bring an olah. So for example, just as an illustration of this, there's an occasion where every individual is required, or every man at least is required to bring an olah, and that is when he comes up to Yerushalayim for the pilgrimage festivals. 3 times a year, you're supposed to come up to the temple for a pilgrimage and bring an olah. Lo yera'u fanai rekam. Bring an olah with you. So the olah is a way of encountering God, meeting with God. God reveals himself to you. You dedicate yourself to him. That's the meeting, okay, that takes place through the korban olah. The olah opens our list of sacrifices both in chapter 1 and in chapter 2 and in chapter 6. Right? Now notice chapter 6 opens with command Aaron and his sons. That already gives us a clue. Chapters 1 through 4 are addressed to Am Yisrael. We are addressing the one who offers the sacrifice. On this and this occasion, you bring this and this sacrifice. And this is how the sacrifice is described from the perspective of the one offering the korban. Chapter 6 starts with command Aaron and his sons. This is the korbanot described from the perspective of the priests. And from the perspective of the priests, the purpose of the olah is to feed the fire on the altar. Okay? That's how the priests look at it. Maybe the Israelites look at it a little differently, because the olah might have different purposes. The one bringing it is perhaps trying to draw closer to God. That's the root meaning of the word korban. Korban is to draw near, to draw close. And the quintessential korban is the olah. That's how you draw close to God. And for the priest, the olah is feed the fire on the altar. You are the custodians of the perpetual fire on the altar, and you feed that fire first and foremost with the olah, and on top of that, the fat parts of the offerings of well-being. They join in. Now we saw the chatat also joins in, but that's not part of the regular worship. That's only when somebody was out of line and needs expiation. But the shlamim is something that we do expect to be brought. Okay? Then speak to Aaron and his sons thus. This is the ritual of the sin offering. Notice, when we address the individual, the shlamim offering came first. When we address the priests, the sin offering comes right after the olah. And we'll see why in just a minute. This is the ritual of the sin offering. The sin offering shall be slaughtered before Hashem, at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered. It is most holy. The priest who offers it as a sin offering shall eat of it, shall be eaten in the sacred precinct, in the enclosure of the tent of meeting. Bingo. The Torah filled in a glaring blank. Remember, we noted back in chapter 4, the Torah didn't tell us what is done with the flesh of with the main body, mostly the flesh of the sin offering. The Torah didn't say. Here the Torah tells us it's eaten by the priests. When we're addressing the individual, he couldn't care less what happens to the rest of it, because it doesn't go on the altar. What interests the individual is the part that goes on the altar. That's important to him. He wants to know, what does God get from this offering? If it's an olah offering, he gets all of it. If it's a shlamim offering, he gets a small part of it. And the other interesting thing for the individual is, what do I get out of it? Well, if it's a shlamim offering, the answer is he gets to eat it. Okay? It's a meal for human beings. The one who brings the offering, the meat comes back to him, he eats it. Is he going to eat the whole animal all by himself? No. What will he do? He'll invite family, friends, maybe the poor, the widows, the converts, and so on. Maybe he'll invite them to join him as well, right? Because how are you going to consume a whole animal? They didn't have refrigeration, and as we'll see, the Torah doesn't allow you to let it sit for more than a couple of days. That's it. That's the end. That's the end. So you get it back and you eat it, and it's probably a festive meal. So I think we are getting an answer now to why a person would bring a shlamim offering. You bring a shlamim offering when you want to have a festive meal, and you want it to be a sacred meal. You want God to be part of your festive meal. So you give God a portion of it. You also give the priest a portion of it. And then you get most of it, which you can then share with family and friends. Okay? So you'll have your festive meal in Yerushalayim, in the presence of the temple. Okay? That's what the shlamim offering is basically about. And here as well, there's the ritual of the sacrifice of well-being, shall be eaten on the day that one offers, and what is left there shall be eaten on the morrow. What is then left of the flesh shall be consumed in fire on the third day. You cannot leave it over till the third day, and if you do, you burn it. Can't be eaten on the third day. If any of the flesh of the sacrifice of well-being is eaten on the third day, it shall not be acceptable, shall not count for the one who offered it. It is an offensive thing, pigul. I brought the Hebrew here because that's going to be a key term in Masechet Zevachim, and the person who eats of it shall bear the guilt. Why do you think it's unacceptable? And not just unacceptable, the Torah uses very harsh language. It's pigul, it's offensive, it's abominable. Why? Well, what happens after 2 days? No refrigeration. Hot Israeli summer. Okay? It's disgusting.
Bugs
It's
come.
disgusting, and it is, you are dishonoring God by eating such a sacrifice. You're dishonoring God by leaving it over till the third day, and it's even worse, dishonoring of God, to actually eat it. How despicable. That's how you honor God? Okay, by eating meat that's turning bad. Okay, that is pigul. As we will see very shortly, Chazal have a very different take on pigul. Okay, what does the Torah say about it? It shall not be acceptable. This korban has been rendered unacceptable. Now let's notice something, and we'll be coming back to this in a bit. When you first offered the sacrifice, was it acceptable? It was slaughtered. The blood was dashed on the altar. The entrails were offered on the altar. Okay, seems fine. Seems like an acceptable korban. You ate part of it on the first day. You ate part of it on the second day. So far, korban has been wonderful. And then you left over some to the third day. Okay, if you burn it on the third day, we'll say, weren't right. You should have made sure to consume it, which means you probably weren't generous enough. You didn't invite enough people to join you to make sure you would finish it in time. But okay, the korban is still acceptable. If you eat it on the third day, so the whole korban retroactively becomes unacceptable. Well, that idea was unacceptable to the rabbis, as we will see shortly. Okay, the rabbis didn't go for that idea at all, and therefore they completely reinterpreted what pigul means, okay? And that's a good entry point for understanding what the rabbis did. Anybody, for anyone who studied these mishnayot, this is supposed to be a Mishnah Yomit program, so hopefully at least some of you have already read the mishnayot. Can anybody enlighten us as to how Chazal defined pigul? What makes a korban pigul? Not that it's eaten on the third day. What makes the korban pigul? Any takers?
Isn't it that you intend to leave it over?
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, let's take a look at Perek Bet, Mishnah Bet. Hashochet et hazevach, lizrok damo bachutz. Okay, here maybe let's. Okay, hashochet et hazevach. You can follow along in the English if you need it. Shochet et hazevach lizrok damo bachutz o miktat damo bachutz. להקטיר תמוריו בחוץ, או מקצת תמוריו בחוץ, לאכול בשרו בחוץ, או כזית מבשרו בחוץ, או לאכול כזית מאור עליה בחוץ, פסול ואין בו כרת. Okay, let's just summarize what we just read. When you slaughtered the animal, your intention was to do one of these forms of service outside of where it's supposed to be. Okay, in other words, say outside of the azara, okay, the temple courtyard. Temple courtyard is where you're supposed to do most of the work with the korbanot. These kind of korbanot, basically all of the work of the korbanot is inside the temple courtyard. So I say, you know what? I'm going to take the blood outside of the temple courtyard. I'm going to sprinkle it somewhere there. Well, that's obviously a terrible thing. That's not what you're supposed to do. And so what happens? Pasul, but ein bo karet. You have disqualified the sacrifice, but there's no karet, meaning if I eat any part of the korban, remember the Torah said about pigul, avono yisa, he will bear his iniquity, which Chazal understand to mean the penalty of karet. Karet is a person dying before his time. Okay, it's a divine punishment. It's not humanly administered. Okay, the Torah describes it as he will be cut off from his people, which is another aspect of it. But the way Chazal understood it is he'll be cut off, and he will also be literally cut off from this world by dying before his time. That's called karet, and that is not applied here. The karet, let's say it's a shlamim offering, and you proceed. You slaughtered it with the intent, I'm going to dash the blood outside of the temple area, outside the temple compound. So then the korban is pasul, but I went ahead and ignored that. I took the meat, I cooked the meat, I'm eating the meat, not supposed to, but there's no karet. Okay? It's an infraction, it's a transgression, it's not karet. However, continues the Mishnah, lizrok damo lemachar, o miktat damo lemachar, laktire murav lemachar, o miktate murav lemachar, lechol b'saro lemachar, b'saro lemachar, that's pigul. See the word pigul here at the end of the Mishnah? That's the word from the Torah. Pigul. The chayavin alav karet. Now it says le'echol, lizrok, le'echol, lehaktir. That's describing the intention. I slaughtered the animal with the intention of doing any of these services associated with the korban at the wrong time. Okay? to dash the blood on the altar tomorrow instead of today. No, I'm supposed to do it today, not tomorrow. To lahaktir is to offer it on the altar and turn it into smoke. I'm supposed to do that today or overnight, not the following day. I leave it to I say, I'm not going to have time today. I'll do it tomorrow. I have disqualified that sacrifice. Or I say, I am intending to eat the meat of this korban tomorrow. Tomorrow meaning the day after I'm supposed to. Okay? If it's a sacrifice that has to be eaten that very day, then tomorrow can be taken literally. If it's a shlamim that can be eaten the following day as well, it means I'm intending to eat it on the third day. Then, not only is it pasul, it's pigul. And the meaning of pigul is that if I then actually eat it, even on the first day, I eat it on the first day, then I'm chayav karet. That is an abomination. The main reason, apparently, why the rabbis interpreted pigul in this way is what I said earlier. The rabbis couldn't wrap their heads around the idea that I will retroactively disqualify the sacrifice. It can't be that for 2 whole days the korban was wonderful. God was delighted with the korban. And you were doing everything right. And then on the third day, you ruin everything. That can't work. That will not retroactively disqualify everything I did. So, pigul must mean from the very outset it was wrong. But here, the Chachamim say, but the Torah is talking specifically about eating it on the third day. Which means, if my intention was to sacrifice it in the wrong place, that's terrible, that's bad, it will disqualify the korban, not pigul. But if the intention was to eat it or dash the blood or offer the entrails on the altar at the wrong time, that's already pigul. Okay, so we'll have a lot more to say about that, not only in today's shiur, but in upcoming shiurim as well, because Masechet Zevachim is enamored of pigul. Pigul is a big topic in Masechet Zevachim. But before we get into that, let's backtrack and go back to the psukim and ask ourselves, from the perspective of the Torah, what are sacrifices about? Okay, so we got an idea of what individual sacrifices are about. Olah is about drawing near to God, stoking the eternal fire on the altar. Shlamim is about a festive meal before God. Chatat is about expiation, atonement. Okay, this is just an introduction, so we took a sampling of the main kinds of korbanot, didn't give a full overview of all the kinds of korbanot. But can we say more generally, what's important about a korban? What does the Torah really care about? When I bring a korban, what does the Torah want us to pay close attention to?
That it's perfect, that I am involved in bringing it,
Right.
that it's instead of me.
Okay, now that's in terms of, went up to the point where I bring it. Okay, but what about after it's brought? Because all the psukim that we looked at were basically we're mostly focused on what happens to it afterwards. And what is the Torah particularly interested in telling us about. Let's look at the component parts of a korban. Okay, the component parts
Who
are:
gets it?
you slaughter it, the blood is then taken and something is done with it. Then some part of the korban is offered on the altar. And in most korbanot, some part of the korban is consumed, not on the altar. Sometimes on the altar, sometimes outside the camp, but most often part of it is consumed either by the person who brought the korban or by the kohanim, right? So that's what the Torah describes. So what would you say is the most significant issue about the korban? What will differentiate one korban from another?
Who eats it?
Who eats it? Where is it consumed? Right? That seems to be the main thing. For the korban olah, all of it is consumed. It all goes up on the altar. For the korban chatat, the priests consume it because that's part of the expiation. You can't have him have a festive meal to expiate his sin. So on the one hand, you don't want all of it to go up because he doesn't deserve that, right? He doesn't deserve to draw close to God. So someone has to consume it, and the one to consume it would be the Kohen. The Kohanim are the ones to consume it. The Shlamim, the individuals, are the ones who consume it. In other words, the impression you get from the Torah is that the main aspect of the korban is what happens to the animal. Once the animal has been slaughtered and the blood has been sprinkled, dashed, placed somewhere or another, mostly on the altar, sometimes in other places as well. Once that happens, what happens to the animal? That's what really gives you your basic definition of korbanot. And therefore, it's turning to the Mishnah now. We start off with the Mishnah. So the Mishnah, okay, those of you who've been following Mishnah Yomit are probably used to this by now. The Mishnah never starts where you expect it, almost never. Okay, which to my mind is not a feature of the Mishnah, but a challenge. Okay, so it's why. Okay, fine, didn't start where we expected, but that means that the Mishnah has a different logic than the logic we brought to the table. So let's see if we can wrap our heads around the logic the Mishnah is bringing to the table. So if we go back to the beginning of Tractates Zevachim, Kol HaZvachim shenizbechu shelo lishman ksherim, shelo alu labalim l'shem mishem chova. All of the animal sacrifices that are offered not for their sake, shelo lishman, are all valid sacrifices, except that they do not discharge the obligation of the one who brings them. And then by the end of the first chapter, we learn about one aspect of bringing the korban. Okay? What is the one aspect at the end of chapter 1 that we learn about? Okay, obviously you slaughter the sacrifice. That's what the whole chapter is about, or virtually the whole chapter is about. And then by the end of the chapter, Mishnah 4, okay, we get to Kibel, Hilech, Visarak. 3 other procedures. Kibel, to receive the blood. Okay.
Conveys it.
The Torah never
conveys it.
really describes that. The Torah says, V'lakach, he shall bring the blood. How does he get the blood? The Torah doesn't say. But the Mishnah turns that into a whole ritual. L'kabel et dam, to receive the blood. Kibel, v'hilech. Then there's another form of service, which is bring it to the altar, the halech. And then there's a third service, zarak, to sprinkle the blood. Basically, it's all about the blood. It's all about the blood. And as we go through the next chapters, we're going to see that the blood part of the sacrifice seems to be much more central in the rabbinic presentation of sacrifices than all the other things. Now, it's true, what happens to the blood does differentiate some sacrifices from others, but they're basically two major models for what happens. And that doesn't cover all the korbanot. What happens to the blood is the same for the olah, the shlamim, the asham, the todah. For all of them, you do the exact same thing with the blood. And they're all different sacrifices. So the Torah differentiates them because the Torah focuses much more on what happens to the animal. And the rabbis focus much more on what do you do with the blood. And that's right from the outset. Right? Shchatan, Shalashman. Shchita, as far as the rabbis are concerned, is the first stage of sprinkling the blood. Because you can't sprinkle the blood until you first draw the blood. Shchita draws the blood, and then the Kohen receives the blood, brings the blood closer to the altar, that's hilech, and then sprinkles the blood on the altar. Okay, so that's one crucial thing. Now, if we were to ask ourselves, based on the Torah, how would we expect the Mishnah to start the discussion of sacrifices? So I'm not the first to note, the commentators already noted this point. There is a chapter which actually would serve as a wonderful introduction to all of the sacrifices. And it would really sum up what we have in the Torah, together with, some of the rabbinic interpretations of what we have in the Torah. And that is chapter 5, very well-known chapter, at least for people who daven all of their morning prayers, meaning they start with korbanot, not that common a practice, but for those who do, then part of the korbanot, you'll find this chapter in the Siddur, Ezehu mikoman shel zvachim. Part of our Siddur, Ezehu mikoman shel zvachim. Okay, what is the location of the slaughtering consumption of offerings? Now, I want you to just jot down in your memory for right now that the Mishnah doesn't ask the question, what do you do with the zvachim? But Ezehu mikoman shel zvachim. What is the place of zvachim? Okay, that's a theme we'll be coming back to. Okay, another thing to note is the term zvachim. That's the name of the tractate. That's another good reason why we might want to open the tractate with this Mishnah. Okay, we open the tractate with the words kol hazvachim. Okay, the word zvachim appears there as well. This would be a wonderful place. And just a brief look, kodshei kodashim shchitatan batzafon. Okay, this already, I think we have it on the source sheet, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so you run through it and you see Kodshei Kodashim, which start off with Parvisay Shel Yom Kippurim. Okay, this is the Chatat offerings on Yom Kippur. Harima Nisrafim, those are the Kohen Gadol sacrifices that we saw earlier and similar ones. Sirei Rashi Chodashim, these are communal sin offerings. Then Haula Kodshei Kodashim. Notice Kodshei Kodashim frames this section. Okay, this is the section of Kodshei Kodashim. Okay, they're all slaughtered in the north. Shchitatan Batzafon. All of these Kodshei Kodashim. Okay, and one more is the Zivchei Shalmei Tzibur. One kind of Korban Shlamim offered on Shavuot that is also a communal Shlamim offering and is considered Kodshei Kodashim. That's the first half of the chapter. Then the next half talks about Kodashim Kalim and runs through the Todah, okay, the El Nazir, okay, part of the procedure of the Nazir ending his Nazirut, Shlamim, Bechor, Maaser, Pesach. There's a rundown basically of all of the Zvachim. And all described from the point of view of where. Are they slaughtered in the north? Or are they slaughtered Bechol Makom Ba'azara? Are they, where is the flesh consumed? Where is the blood sprinkled? Where is the flesh consumed? That's what the chapter does. That would be a wonderful chapter to open Masechet Zvachim. But as we said, that's not how we open Masechet Zvachim. Okay, and instead we open with Kol HaZvachim Shenizbechu Shelo Lishman. Sacrifices that were offered not for their sake. Now let's just think for a minute about what might we think would happen to sacrifices that are offered not for their sake. Meaning, I'm bringing an olah offering. I designated an animal as an olah offering, and then when I bring it, I slaughter it, and I'm thinking, oh, let's bring this as a shlamim. Or let's bring this as a todar. Let's bring this as a chatat. What would you think would happen?
It shows a lack of deep thought or consistency.
Okay.
A flippancy.
Okay. So clearly that person has done something pretty out of line. But my question is a legal question, a halachic question. But I'm not talking about judging the person. Obviously, person will have another al-chet to do on Yom Kippur. That's clear. But my question is, will that disqualify the sacrifice? So based on what we have in the Torah, I might say, who cares? I designated the animal as an olah. I bring the animal, I sacrifice it with the thought, and I slaughter it, let's say. Slaughtering, by the way, doesn't have to be done by a Kohen. Slaughtering can be done by the individual. I slaughter it with the intention of, I'm going to bring it as a shlamim, and then I hand it over to the Kohen. And the Kohen, who happens to know that this animal was designated as an olah, it's got a big sign on it, I am an olah. Okay, so the Kohen happens to know, and he offers it as an olah. Will that be a valid sacrifice? Based on the Torah, I might say, why not? Why not? Just because I had some ridiculous idea in my head, that changes the whole nature of the sacrifice. Did the Torah ever say I have to intentionally bring it as an olah? I have to intend it to be an olah? I have to think about it being an olah as it's being slaughtered? Torah never said that. I might have said that. Or if I'm going to say, well, the cholzot, intention has to matter for something. So the alternative, I would say, would be the whole thing can be chucked out. I've disqualified the whole thing. The Mishnah makes a very interesting compromise. between the two. But the Mishnah says, by the way, I will generally try to, do share screen with the text, but not always. So have a Mishnah handy for all of these shiurim so that you can follow along. The Mishnah says, Ksherim ela shalo alula ba'alim l'shem chova. It's a kosher sacrifice, but I have to bring another one. Since I committed myself to bring a sacrifice, I didn't fulfill my commitment. In other words, what's the compromise? I cannot disqualify the sacrifice by intending a different sacrifice than the one I brought. The halakha says, you know what? So we'll take it as the new sacrifice. Or we'll take it as the old sacrifice. It doesn't really matter. As long as I'm intending some sacrifice, okay, it will still be a valid sacrifice. I'll bring it. It will be a valid sacrifice. For whose benefit will it be a valid sacrifice? For God's benefit, whatever that means. For Am Yisrael's benefit. For the temple's benefit. In other words, there is value to there being sacrifices. The temple is for sacrifices. We want sacrifices to be brought in the temple. And this is one of those sacrifices. And the appropriate parts will be burnt on the altar, and the appropriate parts will be consumed by whoever consumes them. And it's a valid sacrifice. Okay, and for the general merit of the world and of Am Yisrael, there was another sacrifice brought. As far as the individual is concerned, I can't discharge my obligation when I had the wrong intention. That's the Mishnah's compromise. And then the Mishnah makes two exceptions to that, which we can't discuss right now. And that are the Pesach and the Chatat. But don't worry, chapter 5 will give us ample opportunity to come back and examine that. So we'll put that on hold for now. And we'll just conclude with the following. So the Mishnah opens with the question of, to what extent is it crucial to us that the person doing the slaughtering understood which korban he's offering? If he makes a mistake and thinks he's offering the wrong kind of offering, what does that do? And we made this compromise, okay? So that's the first point. But then, by the time we get to chapter 2, we learn about a new concept that we already discussed earlier, and that is the concept of pigul, and compared and contrasted to chutz limkomo. You have chutz limkomo and chutz lizmano. Intention for doing it outside of the place. Interesting. Chapter 5 talked about what is the place. But before we even get to what is the place, we already have in chapter 2, well, what if your intention was to do it in the wrong place? So the intention to do it in the wrong place, in a certain sense, even precedes our knowledge as to what places are we talking about. That will be filled in chapter 5. In chapter 2 already we're talking about, and what if you intended the wrong place? And then chapter 2 also asks, and what if I intended the wrong time? Okay? And so these first 2 chapters are really all about intention. That's the main theme, is intention. And that's really underscored by the epiphora, which connects the end of chapter 1 to the end of chapter 2. There's a key word that, as we'll see, appears 4 times in the the word itself appears more than 4 times in 4 places, 4 strategic places in the first 4 chapters. Right now we'll look at chapter 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 1 ends with Af hamahalech b'makom shu tzarich lahalech hamachshava poselet. The word machshava, thinking, or probably more accurately, planning. The planning disqualifies. And at the end of chapter 2, we also have the same word. Im machshevet hazman kadma lemachshevet hamakom pigul. Because the Mishnah in chapter 2 discusses, what if I had both wrong intentions? I intended both to do it in the wrong place and to do it in the wrong time. So, what the Mishnah, what the Tanakama, the anonymous opinion says is, then it doesn't become pigul. There is no chiyuv karet. The lack of intention to do it in the right place overrides the intention for the wrong time. And therefore, the intention for the wrong time doesn't kick in and make it into not only disqualified, but actually pigul. But then we have the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, the end of chapter 2, who says that's only if the intention for the wrong place preceded the intention for the wrong time. But if the intention for the wrong time came first, then it already became pigul. And then the intention for the wrong place is irrelevant. Okay? Now, the details of that machloket are less crucial for us right now. What is crucial for us is this key term machshava. Because as we'll see, the term will recur in strategic spots in chapters 3 and 4. That's something for you to look for as you look over next week's mishnayot. Okay, where does this word machshava appear in those two chapters? Okay, okay, but let's just note that the word machshava is a key term here. Intention has become a very central feature in the Mishnah. So we've noted then two major points about where the Mishnah diverges from the Torah. Number one, the Mishnah seems less concerned about what ultimately happens to the body of the animal and draws our attention much more to two other features. Number one, the blood, and number two, the intent. And we've talked about three kinds of intention that have three different kinds of ramifications. Intention for the specific kind of sacrifice, intention for the right place, and intention for the right time. Those three intentions are a very integral, very central part of the sacrifices. Now, our time is up, so we won't have time to explore why the sages made this very radical shift in how they're viewing the korban. Okay, but since the next two chapters, which we'll be looking at next week, continue a lot of the themes that we saw in the first two chapters, so we will certainly have ample opportunity to fill in what we didn't manage to fit in this time. So I wish you all a Shavua Tov.
Can I ask you
Sure.
one short question?
For sure.
What's the difference between an asham and a chatas and an asham? They're both for sin, no?
Right. And that, in fact, is exactly Rabbi Eliezer's point in the very first Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer says, if chatat is an exception to the rule of lishman, then asham should be an exception as well, because they're both sin offerings.
That's why I
Okay.
got confused.
But there are different kinds of sin offerings, and the asham is brought for a very specific list of transgressions. Okay, we'll see it in chapter 5, the list of transgressions for which an asham is brought. Asham is translated by the Bible scholar Jacob Milgram, a reparation offering. Because Asham basically, as he analyzes it, represents not so much a transgression, a misdeed, as a kind of a trespass. You trespass upon divine property. You misappropriate something that was supposed to go to God. That's Asham Mi'ilot, and he sees that as the model for the other kinds of Asham as well. Okay, so that's a kind of key, but again, that's just a brief snapshot of a large topic. Okay, but I hope it gives some perspective on it.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you everyone for learning today. Thank you, Rabbi Walfish, for starting things off on such a good note. I'd want to highlight that there are Tisha B'Av classes going on at Drisha from the morning to mid-afternoon. And you can find out more on including explanatory keynote and other shiurim. You can sign up at drisha.org/classes. Good day, and I hope to see as many of you as possible next week.